Hi everyone, this is Skeleton Hotel, and alright, what exactly am I getting at here? The meaning of fun is entirely dependent on the person you're asking and the larger context of the question. And even then, it's not clearly quantifiable. So what's the point of making a tier list based on fun? Well, first, the tier list itself doesn't actually matter much here. Without context, the rankings don't convey any useful information, and they're not supposed to. The real reason I'm making this is that it's an excuse for me to share my thoughts on what makes the game, quote-unquote, fun. You know, rewarding, exciting, interesting, all that stuff. As well as how certain mechanics help or hinder the game's greater potential. Tier lists are a familiar and digestible format for comparing a lot of things in a specific context, so I think it makes sense to use here. Also, even if fun in the game is subjective, it's evident we can still make useful observations about the generalized player experience. Once in a while, someone tells a story about a time they had fun, and they try to explain why they had fun. And that explanation resonates with a lot of other people, even if those other people couldn't put their finger on it before. Does that make it objectively true? No, but it implies there's some broader explanation for these players' similar reactions. So I think there's still good reason to share and refine our opinions about fun. Now, just so y'all have something to reference, here's what each tier roughly means to me for the sake of this video. If you want to skim it, pause and do that right now. Otherwise, here it goes. Alright, so we're just going to go in order as it's presented here, sorted by category, so starting with buffs and then debuffs and helpers and so on. I'm not going to cover the personality cards, just to keep the scope of this video more focused. Alright, so Big Mag. Solid B. Nothing too crazy interesting, but it's nice. Back when Big Mag was cost 2, I was kind of a Big Mag defender. I thought it was like a solid cost 2 buff. I think a lot of the reason why Big Mag was seen as bad before it was reduced to cost 1 is just because there are a lot of cost 2 cards that are frankly too strong for their own good, and they set kind of an unreasonable standard for every other cost 2 card. I'm going to say Bullet Time, let's say B. It usually doesn't feel terribly unfair unless it's paired with, you know, one of the few certain cards that are decidedly a lot less fun and just happen to synergize well with Bullet Time. But I think that's much more the problem of Mind Blowing and Big Head than it is a problem with Bullet Time. Double Jump. Pretty easy A. Double Jump is fun. I really like the fact that it can counter No Jump. I hate playing against No Jump. Energy Drink. Another A. You know, it's a pretty powerful buff for cost 1, but the short duration makes it so you have to use it efficiently to get much out of it. So I think it works out to be strong, but balanced. Health Up is C. It's just not really interesting. It's, I would say, mostly fine, aside from some annoying synergies like Health Up and Health Down, or Health Up plus Rubber Bullets. But that kind of brute force buff debuff stacking is more a broader game design issue than it is the fault of any one specific card. I'm going to put Helmet in kind of like an uncertain C, with a strict warning that they could be downgraded to D at any moment. There's certain bits of cover on some maps where if you stand there with Helmet, the enemy can only see your head, and obviously if they can only see your head and you have Helmet, but you can see them just fine, then, you know, that means you can shoot them while they effectively can't damage you. And like, yeah, at that point they should reposition to get a better angle on you, but on some maps that's easier said than done, and you'll be able to get plenty of shots on them during that time. You know, that and maybe a combo like Big Head Helmet is just like, really? You know, you're going to make this mechanic of the game easier for you and impossible for me? It just feels a bit scummy. Invisible is a solid B. I do still think, and I feel like this is the general consensus, is cost 3 is still much too expensive for it, but otherwise, God, I love this card. If they made Invisible cost 2, it would go into A. I don't think it needs to be cost 1. I genuinely think Invisible is kind of underestimated as a card. Just the utility of an invisibility that you can interrupt at will. Like, yes, Ninja Log and Ninja Smoke are very good, and in most situations better than Invisible, but they're also very predictable once they activate. The enemy knows exactly when you will lose your invisibility. They will know exactly when to listen for the sound of you becoming visible again. But invisible gives you a lot more control, and it leaves the enemy with a good deal more uncertainty as to sort of like what your end game is or what your plan is. Love letter. It can definitely get tedious on occasion, but overall I think it's very well balanced, and it rewards quick thinking and risk-reward evaluation for both sides. I do think in a better world, Medkit would not exist, and we'd just have to use these trickier healing cards like Love Letter to get any sort of like big burst healing. Speaking of that, Medkit, first one going into friend tier. I genuinely believe Medkit is one of the unhealthiest cards in the game, ironically, and that won't change until it gets some major rework. It's a troublesome mix of being incredibly strong, demanding little to no thought or effort to use it to its near fullest potential, and lacking any meaningful counterplay besides use combos that kill so efficiently that the healing won't matter, which, you know, that strategy doesn't need any more incentive than it already has. It simultaneously outshines all other healing cards, and it has oppressive synergy with other healing cards and with high health characters. So what might a fairer medkit look like? Well, gingerly nerfing the amount of health every few balance patches hasn't dethroned it yet, and we can't do that many more times before we just reinvent health up. And I doubt increasing Medkit's cost would make anyone stop running it. They would just pluck out lesser cards from their decks to make more room for it. Just a burst heal that big is just really, really strong, and it's not easily replaceable. The only other feasible option I've come up with personally is changing Medkit to heal over time, like a personal Molebot, maybe like 5 HP a second for 16 seconds. Something significant enough to pressure the other side into acting quickly to minimize its effectiveness, but slow enough that it can't be used as a foolproof second chance like it can basically be used now. I can't pretend I am absolutely sure I know what's best for Medkit, but evidently, whatever change is best for Medkit, it's something more creative than the minor adjustments that have already been tried. More accuracy. It's fine. Move faster. I'm a Haru main, but that bias aside, I like to move fast. It's nice in that it's a pretty strong buff in the right hands. It's very versatile, but at the same time, it's not like a free benefit. You still have to use your movement intelligently and move unpredictably. Poison bullets, yeah, D. I don't like it. The thing I like about poison bullets is it can help against some strong, potentially strong cards like Tin Man and Titan. Otherwise, I think it's just a boring, straightforward damage buff. Basically a better steel bullets on most guns. And quick side note, I think the fact that most of the bullet buffing cards like Poison Bullets, Steel Bullets, and Vampire Bullets all stack with each other and have no sort of duration or other limit to keep them in check is eventually going to become a problem, assuming it's not already a problem. Because if Brainwash Gang ever adds more bullet cards to the game, it's only going to get worse, stacking these passive bullet enhancers pretty mindlessly on top of each other for very strong benefit. Small head. I don't know, it's not very interesting, but it certainly feels more fair than Helmet because you can still shoot their head. But yeah, it's not very interesting. It's not particularly unfun either. It's just, you know, it's whatever. It's there. Steel bullets, gonna go with C. You know, I don't really think it's particularly unfair. It's just another, like, straightforward passive buff. What's the optimal way to use steel bullets? You play it at the start of the round. You don't ever play steel bullets on reaction, and most of the effective combos with steel bullets are just pairing it with other things that enhance your damage, or, like, I don't know, vampire bullets, I guess. There's not much wrong with it, but there's not much right with it either. Oh, Tin Man. A few months ago, Tin Man, I would have been somewhat of an apologist for you, but you just had to go and get buffed for no reason. Yeah, in the past, I'd probably have given Tin Man a solid C or even a B as a kinda overtuned but not egregiously busted card, and also just nice as something that keeps other strong cards sort of in check. But for some inscrutable reason, the spring cleaning update reduced the cost from 4 to 2 and reduced the movement speed penalty from minus 40% to minus 20%. Why? Now the trade-offs that kept it in check kind of. The high cost and the substantial slowdown are gone, and there's even less reason not to be running this card full time. And that seems to be what a lot of people are doing right now, is just you see Tin Man so damn often. I just don't like that there's now yet another sort of like no-brainer card to have in your deck. If there's a short-term solution to balancing Tin Man a bit more, it would just be reverting the changes in the spring cleaning update. And then I think it would still be overtuned, but at least a bit more justifiable, and there would be plenty of other cards that would more urgently need a dedicated effort to rebalancing. Vampire Bullets. Vampire Bullets is in an awkward position. It's certainly not strong on its own, especially for how expensive it is. It's cost 3 still, but it is a solid catalyst for other strong cards and combinations. Is Medkit better than Vampire Bullets? Definitely. But nothing's stopping you from using Medkit and Vampire Bullets and/or health up, and/or health down, and/or steel bullets, and/or Tin Man, etc. Thus, Vampire Bullets is rarely helpful for the side that's losing or currently at a disadvantage, but it's great for the side that already has plenty of cards to brute force a round win. Bigger Explosions, a new friend for the friend tier. I would like to think that the reason why Bigger Explosions is probably not a healthy card is self-explanatory, but maybe it isn't, so I will explain. In short, it's yet another like massive burst damage / insta-kill adjacent type card, which, in my opinion, almost never feel fun or fair or even just particularly interesting to use or to watch other people use it. Bigger Explosions turns explosive cards that are normally perfectly balanced, perfectly reasonable, like Bomb, Bomb Belt, Kaboomber, overpowered, and it makes the explosives that were already pushing it push it that much more. It's not fun to play against, it's not even really fun to use beyond just like the very short-term pleasure of seeing someone die really fast. Bomb Lover. Oh, Bomb Lover. It's such a mediocre card. It's not unfun to play against, it's more unfun to use because it's just so underwhelming. There's not much for me to say about Bomb Lover than just, it's really sad, and its niche is already, I think, perfectly well filled by Bomb Belt, so I don't even really know what I would do to improve Bomb Lover. Phantom Bullets. See, Phantom Bullets in most situations is incredibly situational, and even within the situation that it is helpful, shooting behind cover that you think the enemy is hiding behind and maybe hitting them. Even within that niche, it's not particularly strong or reliable, and it's cost 3. But once you pair Phantom Bullets with Predator Vision and a decently strong long-range bullet weapon, then it's just kind of obnoxious. The enemy just gets to shoot you for a couple seconds while you do not get to touch them. Maybe the most useful application for Phantom Bullets that does not require Predator Vision is, you ever have a fight with an enemy where one or both of you are kind of like dancing behind a pillar, just sort of going back and forth, making it hard to predict which side they'll come out from? Phantom Bullets is kind of nice in that situation because obviously if you can't see them, you know they're behind the pillar and you know where to shoot. But even that is niche. I think of Phantom Bullets as having a similar problem to Vampire Bullets, where on its own, it is certainly not a problem. It's even kind of underwhelming, but it has certain interactions. Speak of the devil, I actually love Predator Vision. It is just a really useful general-purpose information card. You can pair it with Phantom Bullets, but I really don't think you need to. You can use it to ambush an enemy without having to worry about where exactly they are behind the wall that you're about to peek around. You can use it when you think the enemy is about to ambush you, so you can better anticipate them and know exactly when they're going to peek a corner. Maybe one of the best, more reliable combos with Predator Vision that I really don't see many people use is Predator Vision plus Smoke Bomb, and maybe sometimes Toxic Bomb. It is a surprisingly good equalizer if you're, say, stuck with a Boira and you're up against an enemy with a much better weapon, because unless they jump inside the smoke cloud with you, they can't reliably hit you, but you can very reliably hit them still unless they go behind cover. Oh, also Ninja Smoke, Predator Vision. More situational, but even that can be a good combo, because who's going to expect you to pop Ninja Smoke, stay inside the cloud, and then quickly pop Predator Vision so you get a few seconds inside the smoke cloud where, again, the enemy can't easily see you, but you can tell exactly where they are and shoot them just fine. Thick Skin I dislike for basically the inverse of all the reasons I really dislike Bigger Explosions. It's just another dumb, straightforward, brute force, passive buff that doesn't really have meaningful counterplay or interactions to it. You just play it, and in the case of bigger explosions, your explosives become close to an instant kill, or literally an instant kill. And in the case of thick skin, your enemy's explosives just become useless for the entire rest of the round. Just the fact that it can have that sort of rock, paper, scissors interaction of just, oh, the enemy's doing explosive, alright, I play this, they can't hurt me anymore with that. Card Profaner. Oh, Card Profaner, my beloathed. I think Card Profaner might be this game's most egregious win more type card. You know, the ideal use for it is you draw it in the first round, you immediately play the dirtiest combo you can to ensure your first kill, and then round 2 you just get to play it again. But it's not even particularly reliable cheese. It depends on how early you get Card Profaner. It depends on how good your starting hand is, and if you don't get Card Profaner until the late game, it depends on which random cards you get back. The value you get out of Card Profaner is almost entirely down to luck, not your skill or any difficult decisions you make. All that said, how the hell do you nerf/rework Card Profaner to address these problems without creating too many new ones? Brainwash Gang hasn't figured it out, and I've yet to see a satisfying fan suggestion either. I have my own very tentative idea to try to make it not as much of a face roll thing. Maybe I'll just flash it up on the screen right now. You can read it if you want. Card Thief. Yeah, it's a D. It feels like sweet, sweet justice when you have Card Thief and you're playing against an enemy with just a much more stacked, quote-unquote, sweaty deck, and you use this to steal their Medkit or their mind-blowing or some other thing that can, massively turn the tides when you're otherwise in a disadvantageous situation. But for all the times that that happens, there are also plenty of times where you might not be running the most stacked deck, but your enemy certainly is, and finally you see an opportunity to play a certain card or a certain combo that you think gives you a good chance to make a comeback, and then the enemy gets Card Thief, and they steal it. Similar problem, I guess, to Card Profaner, of it can feel really unfair, but it's not even a consistent unfairness. Extra cards. C for being just really boring. I could definitely go on more about why I think extra cards is sort of boring and why I don't like the role it plays in a meta of have these few hyper-specific cards in your deck that make for really oppressive, near uncounterable combos, and just hope you get luckier than your enemy in drawing those. And I did elaborate a lot more about that in a few previous takes, but I think it was just too much time to not really communicate a lot of substance, so I'll just leave it. I think extra cards is boring. Lottery ticket. Basically the same exact problem as I have with extra cards, except I think it's even more boring and just kind of sad. It's like the real lottery. You see someone who just does it once in a blue moon to just kind of have some fun with it. That's pretty innocent. But, you see someone who's doing it all the time. It's kind of concerning. Something's wrong with them. They're going to get something unhealthy. All right, next up, Berserker. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I think it's the ideal state for a high burst damage / insta-kill adjacent card. Generally, I think this game, if you haven't been able to tell yet by a lot of my commentary so far, generally, I think this game is at its most fun when the time to kill is relatively long and both sides get to express their skill in a series of back and forth interactions. Obviously, insta-kill-like cards and combos are not conducive to that sort of gameplay, but I think Berserk has the right trade-offs, so it works out. It feels much more fair. I guess the exception might be Tin Man Berserker or Heartless Berserker or Painkillers Berserker, but, Tin Man Berserker, if they mess up, at the very least, now they have to deal with the consequence of being berserked. And for Heartless and Painkillers, I think those cards at least have their own bit of risk involved most of the time. Ninja Smoke. Hey, it's a gap closer. It's a gap maker. It's a little bit of stealth. You can sometimes use it to dodge burst damage, maybe get out of the way of a bomb or something. It is very, very, very versatile. It can be quite impactful, but it is very, very much dependent on your skill in identifying the situations where you can use it and then executing it properly. Ninja Smoke is never a free win by itself. It's just not that kind of card, and I really like it for that. Painkillers. I'm hesitant to say, I wouldn't say it's perfect, and maybe some days I would give it B. But for the most part, I really like it as a card. To me, Painkillers is like a much more balanced and much more interesting version of Tin Man. It can be incredibly powerful, but it can also be punished if the enemy can stall for even a few moments. You can also screw up the timing, popping it too early, not getting much benefit from it, or hesitating too long and dying before you can use it. Most of the time, I would say. Super fun and well designed. Quick Reload, kind of a similar thing to Big Mag in that it's just a buff that feels good, and it is generally not enough by itself to feel unfair when it's used against you. Silent Steps, genuinely one of my favorite cards in the game. Even though it's a passive permanent buff, it's not one that you can use like mindlessly and still basically get the full benefit from it. Like when you're playing with Silent Steps, you need to play like you have Silent Steps. You need to move more unpredictably. You need to use cover more to deny your enemy knowledge on where you are or where you are headed. If Brainwash were looking to buff Silent Steps a little bit, maybe adding Silent Reloading to the card would be good. Reload sounds give away your position just as well as Footsteps, in my experience, and they also broadcast to the enemy that you will be defenseless for a couple seconds. I end up in a lot of situations where I'm behind a wall with a half-empty mag, and I want to reload, but I'm hesitant to because I know the enemy, if they're paying attention, will use that info to their advantage. I think that would be a situational but occasionally clutch effect. They would probably have to change the name to something more general, like Silent Movement, Silent Hands and Feet, I don't know. A quick aside, this isn't like entirely about Silent Steps specifically, but it's maybe one of the more relevant cards to this talking point I wanted to bring up. It is really sad to me how many players dismiss Silent Steps as worthless, and I think that says less about Silent Steps itself and more about the meta that Silent Steps is forced to compete within. Like, yeah, obviously, so long as we have cost 1 cards that can deal massive, relatively easy damage, like Sticky Bomb and Landmine, or that offer an oppressive advantage, like Bigger Explosions or Pyromania, cards whose benefits are subtler and more nuanced, like Silent Steps, will be seen as a waste. The strongest options in the game ultimately set the standards by which players will judge every alternative, even if a lot of interesting choices get thrown in the trash as a result. And I think that's kind of sad. I feel like that's an untapped potential. I certainly think a game where I'm seeing Silent Steps every other match would be a lot more interesting than one where I see Sticky Bomb every other match. Pyromania. It's less annoying than it used to be, but I still don't like it. Pyromania suffers from a very binary rock, paper, scissors-like dynamic where if you happen to have X card for Y circumstance, you can just give yourself an easy and overwhelming advantage that the enemy can't do much about. It's not like, for example, Bear Trap, which, yes, is usually a death sentence when it works, but getting it to work in the first place is a lot more complicated. The healing of Pyromania is too fast for the enemy to beat you face-to-face without massive burst damage, but if they back off, now you have full health again. It's usually just a lose-lose for the enemy when you get to use Pyromania. On the flip side, if you never draw your Karrotov and the enemy never uses any fire, or you don't have Pyromania yet when that does happen, you can't do anything with it. You know, the times you get to use it, it will probably be hugely, hugely impactful and frankly not that hard to get value out of, but you don't actually have a ton of agency in setting up that situation in the first place. It's mostly just luck-based. Reroll. I run Reroll in, I think, almost every one of my decks, and I don't particularly like that fact. You know, the main reason I like it is it's really good protection against bad luck, and it is a good incentive to use your cards kind of conservatively, because if you end up with a lot of spare cards near the end game, if the cards you have in that moment aren't immediately useful to you, you're going to have a lot of cards to reroll and potentially get something more relevant. If I don't have reroll in a deck, I feel it and I regret it. I don't like it when there's something that seems so strong or even just so convenient in terms of quality of life that I feel obligated to use it. If there was some reroll-like mechanic that was built into the game and it wasn't dependent on having any one specific card in your deck, it was just something that players could do, I don't know, like once a match. If it were implemented right, I think that would be a really nice quality of life thing to somewhat mitigate really unfortunate card RNG. Alright, now we're getting to the new buffs. Venom Eater. Sorry, Venom Eater. It's not that I think Venom Eater is unfair. I think it's essentially balanced, but it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of annoying. If Pyromania is the serial killer, Venom Eater is just like the mischievous, annoying cousin of said serial killer, who is, you know, basically harmless, but you still don't like him. I don't even get impacted all that much by Venom Eater because I don't run poison itself in many of my decks. I have Toxic Bomb in a few of my decks. I basically never run poison bullets, but been too many times in like 2v2 when a teammate has played poison bullets and then the enemy plays Venom Eater and I'm just stuck there simmering thinking, God, now both of us are going to have to pay for your sins, man. Brain Mirror. Here's one I like. In short, I think Brain Mirror is like the more fun helmet. What's the most annoying thing about helmet is it's, you know, hiding behind cover so only your head is visible. Brain Mirror doesn't have that problem because it's, what, 12 seconds? If you try to pull that and the enemy is paying attention, they'll get behind cover of their own and wait it out. You can't really exploit Brain Mirror in that same way. All that said, though, if the game's meta were in a more fun place to begin with, I don't think I would be ranking Brain Mirror so highly because my main praises for Brain Mirror are either that it counters other things that are annoying, or it serves similar-ish functions to other cards, but does it in a slightly more fun way, I guess. Sly Shooter. Man, I really want to like Sly Shooter, but it is underwhelming. The times you get to pull off Sly Shooter, it's incredibly satisfying. I kind of think of Sly Shooter in a similar vein to Berserker, where it's a massive burst damage type card done in a way where it still feels fair and like both sides have agency in the interaction. But getting the back crits, I'm being very careful with my wording, it is difficult sometimes even when the enemy isn't specifically trying to turn their front to you. You sure think you're looking at someone's back, but then you shoot them and you don't get the crit, and now they've already turned around and are looking at you, and that just feels a little bit bad. I certainly don't think the damage needs any buffing. The damage is high. It should probably be cost 2 instead of cost 3, and I think the angle for getting back crits should be more generous than it currently is. And of course, I think that ought to apply to Dale as well. You know, something that makes it more usable, even against players who are paying attention and who are trying to deny you the value of Sly Shooter. Because if you just needed to be sort of behind them, that's feasible. You can do that, even against someone who's paying attention with the right cards or in the right situation. 404. This is just another one that gets a D rank, not because it's like doing anything especially wrong, but just because I don't think it's very interesting. It's a cost 0 card. I don't like cost 0 cards just as a baseline. I think it's a questionable design choice. It makes it much easier to turn a deck that would otherwise be too expensive and or too small to be a valid deck into, well, a valid deck. You know, that's not the hugest issue, but it feels like maybe a sort of unintended exploit, for lack of a better word. The other thing about cost 0 cards, maybe this is the more important one, they seem incredibly difficult to balance. If a cost 0 card is so mediocre or so unreliable that it's not even worth taking up one spot in your hand, even if the cost 0 card itself doesn't cost you anything in points, it's making you ever so slightly less likely to get a better card. And there's not really any reason to run it, but if the cost 0 card is even just good enough to be mostly generally useful, that's like the place I think that cost 0 Nuke is right now, then it's kind of a no-brainer that you should just always run it. I think the presence of cost 0 cards just removes some amount of depth and opportunity cost from deck building. Barbed cards. Not good. Not good. Don't like it one bit. On paper, Barbed cards seems like a good counter to spamming a bunch of oppressive buffs and debuffs in a single round. It seems like it would be a force for good, right? In practice, most people using this card to its fullest potential will just play it right at the start of the round alongside several of their own buffs and debuffs, ensuring the enemy doesn't get to retaliate without sacrificing tons of health and probably losing the round anyway. Ironically, for the person playing Barbed cards, it mitigates one of the main risks of dumping every card at your disposal at once. That is, your opponent punishing you by doing the same thing. Barbed cards is a lot like Self-Destruct Device. It seldom helps the losing side make a comeback. It usually just gives the winning side an even easier time. It also has obnoxious combos with the likes of Garbage Day and Invisible Hand. All around, it's just a real wet blanket of a card. Not overpowered necessarily, but just not fun. I don't think I've ever had a round where I played Barbed cards, or my teammate played Barbed cards, or an enemy played Barbed cards, and I thought to myself, damn, this is really enriching the interaction we're having right now. Speaking of enrichment, Big Head. I just don't like it. Turns out, Big Head makes headshots really easy. And it, again, kind of serves as a catalyst to other already very strong cards. Playing Big Head when you're just stuck with a Boira, I mean, it's certainly good. You know, it's close to giving yourself a plus 50% damage increase to most of your shots. When does Big Head really hurt? It hurts when it's combined with the Boomstick. So Boomstick headshots go from a little inconsistent, but potentially very lethal, to very consistent and still very lethal. It hurts a lot when your enemy has a Leica or an Albatross, and they put a helmet on them, so you don't even have the chance to sort of like out-skill them, out-aim them. It hurts when the enemy is playing steel bullets and poison bullets and vampire bullets. It's not a terribly fun or interesting debuff to have to play around normally, and it's even more dull when it's paired with certain other things. Empty Mag. I love Empty Mag so much. So much. On its face, it just seems like an unfair card. You're just like, oh, they don't get to shoot you, but there's a lot of nuance to it that's not apparent at first. Using Empty Mag to its fullest potential, or hell, even just using it so it has any effect at all, requires some pretty precise timing, and you just in general paying attention to your enemy's actions. If the enemy is already reloading, regardless of whether their magazine is actually empty or not, and you play Empty Mag, it doesn't interrupt their reload animation, so they still get their next full magazine at the same time, and Empty Mag didn't buy you any time. It's perfectly possible to make a mistake with Empty Mag, even if you know what you're doing. Empty Mag is also perhaps a somewhat risky, but potentially quite strong counter to Akimbo. You know, if you want to just play it super safe, you just play Empty Mag the moment that they take out Akimbo. But if you want to be a little bit more sly about it, you can wait for them to get close to you, maybe with the help of something like Predator Vision to know when they're coming and from where. And you play Empty Mag right as they jump around, and now, in a situation where they assume they're going to get massive damage on you with no real repercussions, now you've reversed the situation, so they're stuck reloading, probably at close range, pretty defenseless, and you have a good opportunity right then and there to just shoot them while they're a little bit disoriented. Garbage Day. Oh boy. I am not putting Garbage Day in the friend tier because it's like egregiously unfun in any one specific way, but because pretty much all of its use cases are annoying. Garbage Day plus Barbed cards is just tedious. Garbage Day plus Invisible Hand robs your agency for doing interesting combos and reactive counterplays more than Invisible Hand already does that by itself. None of these strategies are even that strong or reliable, but they're all annoying, and they will occasionally result in kills that don't feel particularly deserved, shall I say. Health Down. Oh boy, another debuff for friend tier. Health Down is like the poster child for cards that when you play them, they signal to the enemy, I don't want to interact with you, I just want this round to be over with me winning. It's a card that just has like as little effort as it gets really to deal damage while still dealing a significant chunk of damage. There's not really any risk to Health Down. There's not really any counterplay to Health Down. You just play it, and it immediately, right then and there, pretty much guaranteed, brings you closer to winning. You don't have to get creative with it. You don't have to do anything smart with it. You don't have to anticipate the enemy having some way to work around it. It will just work, and there's nothing you or even the person playing it can really do about it to make it not work. Invisible Hand. F. Whether or not a player actually has ill intent when they're using this card, or they're just using it, they're just playing the game and they're using one of the cards at their disposal, it's really hard to see Invisible Hand played against me and not feel an implicit message of, I don't really care about having a fair fight with you. I don't really care about both of us being able to show our skill to the fullest. Both of us being able to demonstrate we can make really reactive counterplays, we can do really creative, spontaneous things, how well we can play around combos or whatever. I'm just going to hope that you weren't paying close enough attention to your hand, and now you're gonna play like a newbie who has no idea what they're doing and they're just playing cards arbitrarily. Again, I'm not assuming that everyone playing Invisible Hand literally has that intention, but regardless of whether you intend it or not, that's sort of like the end you're getting to by playing the card. It's what you're relying on happening if you want to see any meaningful reward for playing the card. After all I had to say about Invisible Hand, you might think you know where I'm going to put Invisible Health. Going into D for, yeah, I could put Invisible Health in C tier even. Invisible Health most of the time is pretty inconsequential. I am not literally staring at my health bar at all times anyway, and I'm usually just listening for Haru to yell something. It just doesn't really feel like it has any impact for better or for worse. I can mostly just ignore it. It's going into D tier not for being, like, unfun per se, but in D tier for just, it's not really interesting either. It's just Invisible Health. Less accuracy. Right. There are a lot of cards in this game that you can argue are cheap, dirty, cheesy, whatever pejorative. And somehow, something about less accuracy feels especially underhanded. It's certainly not the strongest debuff, but I hate it. What is the counterplay to less accuracy? Getting closer? Maybe, but good luck if you're fighting a Stevie parked across the map, or someone that has weapon or explosive cards to make running up to their face backfire immediately. Kind of like Invisible Hand, it's just like, I'm just playing something that makes it so you can't show your skill, and I still get to show my skill. Mind-blowing. Is it any surprise? I don't know how much there is to say about mind-blowing that isn't self-evident. You can play it at the start of a round to quickly secure a point if you aim well and or if you pair it with bullet time or the like. You can also play it to clutch a round you were about to lose, even if the enemy has pretty much all their health. For counterplay, you can occasionally do cheeky things like tilting your head back and spinning around, but most of the time it will come down to you having the right card in your hand or your enemy missing all of their shots. It's pretty miserable to play against, and I hope not too many folks have fooled themselves otherwise. Alright, move slower. Yet another reason I mean Haru. Slower speed means you can barely dodge, and repositioning and closing gaps becomes way harder. If you're going against an Albatross plus turret camper on rooftop, or getting rushed by mind-blowing on island, and the enemy tops it off with move slower, it will reliably suck out what little fun you didn't know was left to be had. I put it in D instead of F because it's not quite as oppressive as the likes of No Jump. Hey, look what's next. And it isn't too miserable outside of being like double stacked or comboed with some other specific thing. No Jump, F. F for fun to jump, not fun to no jump. Jumping is an essential component of dodging and map positioning in this game. A novel insight, I'm sure. So it turns out when you take away a player's ability to jump for an extended period of time, you nullify a lot of their potential to express skill or even agency. I genuinely think this card could have a duration of like 5 or 6 seconds and still be cost 2, and it would still be strong. At least then it would demand a bit of thought on behalf of the user. There's negligible nuance to using no jump well or playing against it well, aside from the target playing double jump or stalling out the duration somehow. Pixel vision. D doesn't very fun. I used to think of pixel vision as kind of like a joke, mostly harmless. The most soul-crushing thing about pixel vision is the number of times enemy has played it. I thought, that's a weird choice, this will probably do nothing, and I immediately feel its effects. It is remarkable just what a little bit of visual distraction, just a little bit of making it a little harder to see where their head is or to see where they are from a distance. Even the slightest hesitation, the slightest delay in you being able to react to your enemy can make a tangible difference. It's not something that feels like very interesting or skillful. It's just kind of annoying. Someone play pixel vision against me, I never really think like, ooh, that's a clever use of pixel vision. I think, why are you using pixel vision, goddammit? Poison. A nice little C tier, I guess. It's about as fair as a free damage card can be, I guess. I do personally wish the damage over time were lower and slower to make it better as an information tool rather than yet another low to no risk damage dealer. My ideal poison would be like maybe 2 damage per second for 10 seconds instead of the current 5 damage per second for 5 seconds. But more than anything, that just kind of exposes my taste in cards. I'm going to put Rubber Bullets in F for kind of a similar reason again to like less accuracy, where it just feels cheap, and it is one of those cards that stacks really, really well either with itself or just other purely passive buffs and debuffs that, you know, you don't really have to think about when you play those cards. You just play Rubber Bullets, health down, health up, steel bullets, poison bullets, whatever. You play those cards together, you don't really have to think about it. You're going to get very solid results out of them. Small Mag. I'm going to put it in C. I don't love it, but of all the like really popular, pretty strong debuffs, I think Small Mag is one of the fairer ones, one of the less unhealthy ones, I guess. And there are multiple reasons why I significantly prefer it over Slow Reload. You know, if you play Slow Reload against an enemy that's stuck with a Boira, it's going to hurt. On the other hand, if you use Slow Reload against someone with a Boomstick, an FK, maybe even an Albatross if their aim is good enough, they might well not feel it at all. They might well kill you well before they have to even worry about reloading, and in that case, Low Reload does nothing for you. Small Mag affects all weapons more equally. You will feel the effects of Small Mag whether you're using a Boira, Deep Fryer, Puncher, Albatross, FK, Boomstick. Swap weapons. A. Love swap weapons. Just getting beyond the fact that if you have bad weapon and an enemy have good weapon, you can turn things around. There's a lot of subtler interactions with swap weapons and a lot of depth to using it to its fullest potential. Sometimes it's beneficial to use swap weapons when you and the enemy have the same weapon, because if you empty your mag and you begin reloading at about the same time that the enemy finishes reloading and is about to start shooting you again, you can play swap weapons in that moment, and now they have to reload again and you can immediately start shooting them. I feel like I could go on and on about the just little cool things you can do with swap weapons, but you get the idea. Clown Shoes. D. I kind of want to like Clown Shoes. I used to use it a little bit here and there because I do like the information it gives you. It's like a Predator Vision that is less precise, but the fact that it lasts the entire round is nice. But I stopped running it pretty much just because the sound. Whether the enemy is playing Clown Shoes against me or I'm playing Clown Shoes against them, I cannot hear myself think over the sound. I think still to this day, double Clown Shoes makes the sound play, you know, twice at once, which somehow is even louder than you would think it would be. It is god-awful. It is genuinely painful. If they made Clown Shoes to be less of just kind of like a childish, haha, the enemy is funny loud, and, you know, replace the sound with something that achieves the goal of making your enemy's movement a lot more conspicuous, but isn't quite as obnoxious, then, you know, I'd probably put Clown Shoes up to a C, I guess. Disarm. B. It's similar to swap weapons in that it's only a card that's useful if the enemy is using strong weapon cards against you. If your enemy is not relying much on weapon cards and they're mostly just sticking to like their Boira, or they're playing like Mick and they're mostly sticking to their Brasshopper, you know, disarm and swap weapons, not going to hurt them that much. Slow Reload. I kind of already talked about Slow Reload when I talked about Small Mag. Also, I don't know if I've explicitly stated this already, but just so we're clear, I'm going to try not to factor in double stacking buffs and debuffs for this tier list, because there are plenty of cards where alone they are reasonable, but when double stacked, they are just absolutely miserable. And I think that's going to remain a problem until double stacking passive buffs and debuffs is just removed entirely. You know, we can talk about changing penalties and bonuses from additive to multiplicative or vice versa, but I think the direct, straightforward, most foolproof approach is just don't let these kinds of cards be double stacked. Oh, you're in 2v2 and you and your teammate both got Small Mag, so you don't both get to use it this round? That is such an enviable problem to have. That just means you get to use one Small Mag this round and one Small Mag next round. Is that awful? Frozen Gun. C. Don't love Frozen Gun, but I don't hate it. I do feel a little bit jaded about Frozen Gun, though, because I want to say in its current state, it is mostly, not always, but it is a mostly better and easier to use empty mag. You know, back when Frozen Gun was cost 3, it was kind of expensive for its effect, but it seemed kind of a reasonable price to pay for essentially an empty mag that's really hard to mess up. But now it costs just as much as empty mag, and it's usually just as good or better. You get the idea. Silence. I kind of want to put Silence in D, because even though I really don't like this card, I really don't like the sorts of like plays and combinations that it rewards. In my experience, the vast majority of people don't know how to use Silence well. Most of the time the enemy plays Silence, they play it too early and they don't actually take advantage of the period of silence. But someone who knows how to use silence well and when to use it and what to combine it with. F, yet another debuff that just has no real interaction to it. You just hope that the enemy doesn't get a really, really, really good opportunity to use it and destroy you. The tier list is looking a bit dire right now, with our largest category being the friend tier. But fear not, there are a lot of cards up ahead that I do quite like. It was unfortunate that one of our first two categories was debuffs, which, you know, as you can see here, just a lot of winners in that category. On to the helpers, starting off real damn strong with Bear Trap, another contender for one of my favorite cards in the game. It's a real sleeper to me. It's far from being among the strongest 1-point cards, but I do think it's more flexible than folks give it credit for. I think a lot of players don't know that the deployed Bear Trap is invisible to enemies. It does shimmer a little bit like invisible players, but most of the time it's not meaningfully perceptible. And once you know that, you can get kind of creative with it. It also just has some kind of funny niche applications. Like, it can, situationally mind, but massively punish Ninja Log, because Ninja Log will block the damage of the Bear Trap, but the target is then stuck in place and unable to shoot for a few seconds. You know, obviously that's a really good advantage for you to leverage. You know, you either need to be clever with where you put it, or you need to do some silly maneuver like using Ninja Log to get really close, and then dropping the Bear Trap at their feet, and even then, you kind of need to guess where they'll be walking since it's not instantly deployed. Really, really good card. Next, Bomb. Another good one. B for Bomb in B tier. Bomb is fun. It's more skillful and interactive than most other burst damage cards, and I sincerely think it's quite good for cost 1. The only reason it's seen as weak right now is because we've all been spoiled by Sticky Bomb, which is simultaneously a lot stronger and a lot easier to use. I personally think Sticky Bomb has no business dealing anything over like 60 damage, but I'll talk more on that later when we get to it. As for Bomb, I'm not even sure it needs a buff. Maybe I'd increase the damage to 75. Even as is, up to 70 burst damage from a single cost 1 card is very substantial, if nothing game-breaking. And that's a good thing. That's a good standard for card balance. I think if we ever find ourselves in an era where Bomb is considered like mid-high tier, you know, assuming its damage is still about the same as it is now, that would be a good indication we've reached a healthier meta. And what do you know? Next up, Bomb Belt. If Bomb I put in B tier because it is very fun, but it's a little bit sad the position it's in. Bomb Belt goes in A for being basically Bomb, but having its own respectable place. It's surprisingly good against Shrink Spell. It's not as easy as like just hitting them with the puncher, but it's still a solid option against what's maybe one of the strongest cards in the game. It used to bother me more that Bomb Belt bombs deal less damage than a real bomb. Bomb Belt bombs deal 60 each, bomb deals 70. But over time, I've come to think it's a reasonable trade-off for the fact that you get 4 bombs to throw. One more thing, this technically goes for bomb and any other throwable explosive, I guess. Bomb Belt is really good with Predator Vision. It removes a lot of the guesswork, and it just lets you throw bombs just the exact spot you need to over or around cover to still catch someone in the splash damage. Alright, Katurret. Not our best winner. It kind of depends on the map and what other cards and strategies are in play, but I rarely have fun against Katurret. It deals relatively high and consistent damage at pretty much any range. It can't be juked like Kaboomber shells can, and it has a whopping 140 health, more than the Kaboomber's 120 for some reason. If you set up on high ground with a Katurret and a Leica or Albatross, you force the enemy to make one of a few bleak decisions. 1, they focus fire on you as they engage and suffer you and your turret's combined fire. 2, they try to peekaboo the turret from afar while you get free potshots on them. Or 3, they sit still and refuse to initiate at all because they're no more obligated to approach your side of the map than you are to approach their side. I think the turret excels as a win more card. It makes already strong decks and strong hands even stronger against enemies forced to make do with less. Like, if your enemy has like a bunch of really good guns ready, they have a sticky bomb ready, they're not gonna care much about a Katurret. They'll take it out real quick. But if you're just going against someone who's like with a Boira or a Brasshopper, you have given yourself a pretty big advantage that you arguably didn't need. If camping in general were less rewarding or more easily punishable, maybe Katurret wouldn't bother me as much, but as is, it's really dull to play against if the user knows what they are doing. Flash Bomb is... I like Flash Bomb. I want to like it more, but it's so hard to use. I'm tempted to put it in C, but I'm going to give it an optimistic B. Every now and then you do something kind of neat with Flash Bomb, but there are so many ways for it to go wrong or just for it to fall flat. Sometimes I throw Flash Bomb behind me, and I step in front of it, and I think it's behind me at least, but I still get blinded, and I don't really understand why. Other times, I throw a flash bomb, and maybe because I'm looking away also, I think maybe the enemy got blinded by it, but I can't really tell immediately. Like, yeah, after a few seconds, you'll probably be able to tell if they got blinded or not, but I would prefer to be able to act on that information right away, because if it takes me a couple seconds to confirm that they are indeed blinded, then I've already lost most of my chance to act on that information. If Flash Bomb had some sort of visual indicator, like an overhead particle effect or something, over players that were blinded by it, so it were unambiguously clear when you've successfully blinded someone, I think that by itself would make it more satisfying. I'm looking at my script here, and I had so much to talk about with Ice Block that is now just not nearly as relevant because they recently changed Ice Block in a way that I really liked. I'm going to give Ice Block a strong B. I like how versatile it is. You can obviously use it as like a stalling tool. You can use it to tank burst damage. You can also use it in the middle of a firefight to make the enemy waste a few of their shots, or you can give yourself some time while you reload. There's just a lot of little but significant ways you can use Ice Block to good effect. Kaboomber. Really like Kaboomber. Solid B. Probably my favorite turret card to use and to play against. Kaboomber has a lot going for it that I don't think Katurret does have going for it. Kaboomber is still potentially quite strong in the right situation. It can still deal massive damage, and it can be a strong pressuring force on the enemy. But at the same time, it's a bit more nuanced than just if the enemy enters its sight line, they start to die. It sort of depends on the relative angle between you and the Kaboomber, but you can definitely dodge Kaboomber shots in a lot of situations. If you, for example, jump right before the Kaboomber fires, so it fires its shot at the apex of your jump, then more often than not, the shell will overshoot you. It will go over your head, and not only will you not be hit directly by the shell, but you won't even be caught in the splash damage most of the time. And with some practice, you can pull that off pretty damn reliably. That doesn't entirely negate the effect of Kaboomber, though. It's still forcing you to move in kind of a strange way that might distract you from your actual enemy. But I like that even if you're forced to enter its line of sight, there are things you can do around it. Also, it has 120 health, which, again, I wish Katurret had that. Karrotov. I'm going to give Karrotov a kind of uncomfortable C rank. For the sake of this placement, I'm going to make a perhaps generous assumption that it dealing damage during Nuke's freeze time is unintended and will eventually be patched out, God willing. That is a cheesy combo. I'm sure it's great if you want to win the Discord tournament, but don't trick yourself into thinking the game is more exciting for its inclusion. Even that aside, Karrotov still has a lot of jank that can screw over either side. Sometimes the explosion slips through walls and floors. Sometimes the AoEs will extend far beyond the visual effect and you get melted by invisible fire. That really still happens a lot. And the damage can vary a lot depending on how many flame entities stack on top of each other, which is not visually clear, so it feels as good as random. The recent-ish change that capped fire damage at a maximum of 20 per tick has alleviated this a little, but 20 per tick is still pretty crazy for such a large area. What do I like about Karrotov? When it behaves itself, which is asking a lot, I think it's reasonably balanced, and it's a great counter to meta cards like Tin Man, and is Titan considered meta anymore? I don't know. You get the idea, though. It's a good counter to a lot of other cards that are arguably more annoying than Karrotov. Landmine. I do think Landmine in its current state is a bit too strong, specifically when it's used to just throw it near someone's feet and shoot it for a very quick and reliable 140 damage. I don't think that part of it should be entirely removed, but it should deal a lot less blast damage if it's shot within a few seconds of it being placed, maybe down to half its base damage, so 70, I guess. Other than it being way too good of a kill confirm, even against enemies with near full health, yeah, it's kind of fun. I do like it. Smoke Bomb. Maybe kind of a weird A. Surprisingly versatile. Most obvious use, I guess, is to block troublesome sight lines as you approach, but you can also use it to effectively disable turrets. It blocks their line of sight, and most of the time, the 30 seconds that Smoke Bomb lasts will be more than enough time for the round to be over by then. You can use Smoke Bomb to make yourself hard to track in close quarters, and you can even pair it with Predator Vision for a really inexpensive but really, really respectable combo. I might have talked about that earlier. Sticky Bomb. I'm sorry, man. It's D for you. I'm just tired of Sticky Bomb. It's far from the most overpowered or unfair card in the game, but there's nothing about it that I particularly like either. I already mentioned Sticky Bomb when I was talking about regular Bomb, but I want to elaborate more on Sticky Bomb and the larger game design problem it connects to. The amount of skill and risk involved in using this card is vastly dwarfed by the reward you tend to get out of it. With regular Bomb, the fuse is so long that enemies almost always have ample time to move away unless you shoot it to blow it up early or corral them into a tight space. And even if the enemy's boxed in, you still need to account for the way the bomb will bounce and roll after it lands. With Sticky Bomb, it just sticks to whatever and wherever it first touches, and it blows up a short moment later. If you hit a player directly, great, you've already secured 100 damage unless they tank it with something like Ice Block. If you were using regular Bomb, it'd just have bounced off and they'd still have time to move away. I feel like I see a lot of people talk about sticking direct hits with Sticky Bomb as if it's a very difficult thing, when I think it's one of the main things that makes Sticky Bomb as strong as it is. It is a unique strength that it sticks to people. If you miss with Sticky Bomb, there's a solid chance it lands close enough that they can't get out of the blast radius in time, and they still end up taking as much or more damage than they would from a precisely executed regular bomb. That is the gist of my gripe with Sticky Bomb, and lots of other meta cards, I guess, like Health Down, Mind Blowing, No Jump, those sorts. There's minimal depth to using these kinds of cards well, and there's not much risk of backfiring even when they're used sloppily. At worst, they do nothing. At best, they might almost single-handedly win you the round. If Sticky Bomb is going to remain easier to use than Bomb, it shouldn't be as rewarding as Bomb. I don't think just increasing Sticky Bomb's cost would be adequate, because it's strong enough that players would probably sooner sacrifice some other cost 1 card in their deck than consider benching Sticky Bomb. I feel like this is a contentious one. There are a lot of Sticky Bomb likers who I have courteous disagreements with. Toxic Bomb, a decent B. I've liked Toxic Bomb for a long time. The damage got buffed a tiny bit semi-recently. Was it Nirvana that buffed the damage? I can't remember. And that's nice, I guess. I was personally hoping they'd instead raise the duration to at least like 20 seconds and maybe also increase the size of the cloud just a little bit, because I think the combination area denial and line of sight blocking is what makes Toxic Bomb more interesting than just a Diet Karrotov. Still, at least you don't have to worry about Pyromania with Toxic Bomb. Oh shoot, I wrote that before Venom Eater was added. Oh well. Wall and Bouncy Wall. Gonna basically put them in the same spot for the same reasons. I want to like these cards. They're silly, they're unassuming, they're cute, but they're so incredibly situational. A lot of the times I get anything done with Bouncy Wall or Wall, it's mostly an accident. I think the other day on Theater, I threw a Bouncy Wall down between me and a Duck Anderson just to try to like block their shots, I guess, but it actually got them stuck in like a corner between a statue and a wall. Like, they could not move. It was really funny, but I also felt kind of sad for them. I shouldn't waste too much time on these cards. I don't know if there's much to say. Will say, though, not the most reliable strategy, but something I have noticed. You can use Bouncy Wall as a booster seat for a Kaboomber. The shell that the Kaboomber shoots might skim the top of the Bouncy Wall, but that's fine because the shell will just bounce off. Not the most efficient thing. It does mess with the Kaboomer's aim, but I've been surprised how often I've still seen my Kaboomer get kills in this way. It's just really funny, the visual of a Kaboomer like on its own personal fortress. And it's hard to shoot the Kaboomer when most of it is behind the Bouncy Wall. Molebot, Dr. Molebot. Nice little B for me, though I feel like I'm going to need to, like, justify myself on this one. I know that a lot of folks seem to dislike Dr. Molebot, mostly when it's used for camping, of course. And I certainly don't think its design is perfect. It does have a camping problem, but it's got redeeming qualities too, I think. Does Dr. Molebot encourage camping? Yeah, I guess. But at the very least, Molebot and its interactions are way more interesting than other camping tools. What do you usually want to do when the enemy plays Molebot? You want to rush in to either destroy it or get in the healing radius yourself as fast as possible. You are incentivized to break their camp, to retaliate fast. I will gladly take that over an enemy with distant high ground, a Leica, and a turret that keeps me and my Boira stuck behind cover, where my best hope is they eventually get bored and walk over their damn selves. On that note, something I really like about Molebot is how well it works as a counter to camping. Say the enemy set up on the other side of rooftop with an Albatross and maybe some turrets. Familiar situation. They're perfectly content forcing a 5-year game of peekaboo because they know they will win it eventually. But if you then put down a Molebot that they can't shoot without moving to your position, now the war of attrition favors you and they are pressured to initiate an actual fight. So that's quite nice. Teleport bomb, teleport bomb. Oh my gosh, I love teleport bomb. It maybe leaves a bit to be desired, but I love it. Most frustrating is probably how slow and floaty the bomb itself is, like pretty much all other bombs. So it's unreliable as a quick escape tool, but for closing gaps and just disorienting the enemy in the middle of a firefight, it's a bit better. Teleport bomb is also kind of obtuse about where and when it lets you teleport, so sometimes it will just fail and buzz at you and you won't really know what you did wrong. But it's so satisfying the times it works, and it's remarkable how often I just throw a teleport bomb like semi-randomly in the middle of a firefight and it genuinely throws the enemy off. Like even if they can see me throw the bomb, it makes them like hesitate as they turn around just long enough to give me a little bit of an opportunity to act upon. Bat turret. I used to not really think much of bat turrets. Not a ton of people run bat turrets unless they're, doing like kind of a funny build where they're just running all the turrets. But I started using it more myself and I've gained an appreciation for it. Solid B, I think. I think bat turrets are still quite effective. Is it as good as turret? Obviously no, but that's not a reasonable standard, let's be honest. They don't do a ton of damage, but it's also not trivial damage if the enemy chooses to ignore them or you pressure them such that they can't easily destroy them. They were kind of nice as like a little radar because you can just put 2 bat turrets down in like different locations and they're sort of like security cameras for if the enemy enters that sight line. And I like how, much like Cluster Jr.'s mini turrets, you can't use these things mindlessly. A turret, sometimes you can just sort of place it not thinking too much and still potentially get a lot of use out of it as long as you like play around it a little. But bat turrets, if you place bat turrets sloppily, the enemy just breaks them. If you're going to use bat turrets, you have to play smart and you have to play kind of aggressive. If you're not just placing the bat turrets as just like little area scanners, like I said, and you actually want to use them to damage first and foremost, you need to drop down the bat turrets and immediately start pressuring the enemy so they cannot focus on every threat at once. And if you do that, it's really not bad. It is distracting and the damage adds up. But, it's damage you kind of have to work for. So already people are going to prefer health down to it. Oh, Laser Fence. Another favorite. Oh my god, Laser Fence. It's kind of a sad story, but a story of redemption. Of redemption that's... It's not over yet. It still kind of needs a little more redemption, but, it's inspiring stuff anyway. When this card first came out, it was very novel, very imaginative, but you couldn't really accomplish much with it since it only gave you 2 fence pulls. After Nirvana, it got buffed to give 4 pulls instead of 2. And it's a lot more usable now. It's not top tier, it's not even close, but it's usable now. You can do things with it here and there. Even at its best, Laser Fence is like an awkward Karrotov with extra steps. It's harder to use and with less reward, typically. But there will be times you can get really creative with Laser Fence and pull off some sick stunts, but it's almost never the optimal tool for a situation. Also, not in Laser Fence's favor, I think more and more people are realizing that if you just beeline it straight through the fence, you only take like 48 damage and the slowdown is over before the user can take much advantage of it. So it's not even that effective for its main intended purpose. I suppose the damage could just be increased outright, but I think a more interesting buff would be adding a stronger inner layer to the fence. The main hitbox would remain as it is right now, actually quite wide, but then there could be a much thinner hitbox perhaps down the middle of the fence that like deals double damage and or makes the slowdown much more dramatic. That would obviously make laser fence more effective as a fence, but it could also incentivize those more ambitious plays where you're placing poles as you run around the enemy, trying to get the fence to pop up right on top of them. Stunts like that are sick, and they deserve more reward for how tricky they are to pull off. Dice Bomb. I talked about like how I don't like cost 0 cards when I talked about 404, right? I did that already. I don't want to have to do that again. Again, Dice Bomb is not a thing. If I'm not saying it's overpowered or anything, it's not like a threat to balance. I don't think it's interesting. I don't think it's enriching. You know, it's in the name. It's random. Can you say anytime you've ever gotten a kill with Dice Bomb, or even just like gotten a significant benefit out of it, can you really ever say in good faith that you earned it? Because if you say yes, then that implies that every time Dice Bomb does basically nothing for you, that's a failure on your part, that you are failing to use it well. You see what I'm getting at? I don't know. I don't like it because the vast majority of the time, it accomplishes nothing really because you can't know what it's going to do. You just throw it at the enemy and hope it's one of the few stronger bombs it can possibly be. But the fact that every now and then it can get a kill or it can severely damage, it's just kind of sad. I'm sure there's some interesting rework you could come up with for Dice Bomb, but I'm not going to explore those possibilities right now. Alright, wild cards. Some cards I really like in this category, and some other ones. Heartless. I don't know if this is a surprise, but I'm going to give Heartless a sort of a cautious C. Yes, Heartless into Nuke is not fun. It's kind of like a silly game of hide and seek the first few times, but that quickly loses its novelty, and I just would like to go back to playing a real game. Heartless and Wall is not fun. Does that even still work anymore? I feel like I never see anyone use Heartless and Wall these days. But if you can push aside those use cases, if you can resist the temptation to exploit them, and you instead just go for more interesting, unconventional plays with Heartless, it can be genuinely very fun and engaging for both sides. There are just a lot of funny little things you can do with Heartless. You can throw a smoke bomb, makes your heart slightly harder to find, and yes, you can make out silhouettes while you're in a smoke cloud still, but you can exploit that to your advantage. You can throw a smoke bomb somewhere a bit more conspicuous, and then throw your heart not quite in the smoke, but actually more over there, just kind of behind that box. You know, the funny thing is if the enemy is paying attention in that situation, you'll probably actually trick them into looking in the wrong place. You can throw a teleport bomb, and then while the teleport bomb is midair, throw a heart. And then if you time it right, you will teleport, and then your heart will hit the ground, and you'll start taking damage ticks, but the enemy is probably going to have a lot less precise an idea of where your heart is, because usually the damage you start taking after you drop your heart is a pretty reliable giveaway as to where your heart is. These combos are a lot less reliable than the usual cheese, but they're so much more fun and interesting, and when I see players attempt them, even if it doesn't always work out, I respect it. Nuke. Oh man, you would have been A tier easily for so long, but they went and made you cost 0. They went and made you cost 0 for no reason. That is like pretty much my only real complaint with Nuke, is that it's cost 0 now. But you know, other than that, it's a nice little wild card. It's not like it was unpopular too. People were still using Nuke plenty when it was cost 2. I really don't know why they made it cost 0. Parley, B or A? B or A? I'll give it a high B. I really like Parley. I liked it when it was cost 3. It was definitely way too expensive. I just always thought, oh, if they make it cost 2, it'll be in a great spot. Then they went ahead and made it cost 1. And now that it's cost 1, you're actually seeing people using it. It's just a fun, kind of showy little card. It's a really fun way to just close the gap to someone. Like if someone sets up with a sniper on rooftops, it's just really fun to play Parley and just walk at them. Interestingly, it stops damage from floor is lava. You still bounce across the lava, but you don't take damage, which is strange because I'm pretty sure you still take fire and poison damage during Parley, much like the Karrotov Nuke interaction. I wish they would just make it all more consistent and just make damage stop working entirely. You know, it's not the most exciting card in the game, but it's charmingly silly. I like it a lot. Titan. Titan, 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 Titan. When I have this tone of voice, you know it's not a good tier. Titan and F. The idea of Titan is cute. It's kind of like an asymmetrical mini-boss fight with how it changes up the dynamic between the players, but that novelty gets spoiled by how binary the outcome tends to be. It is funny to me that the popular perception of Titan seems to have shifted toward it not being very good anymore, mostly because of all the other popular quote-unquote meta cards that counter it, Karrotov, Deep Fryer, Mind-Blowing, Poison Bullets, so on. But that doesn't really speak to its broader balance or fairness. Yeah, Titan has strong counterplays, but they're all contingent on you having very specific cards to work with. If the enemy plays Titan and you don't have at least one of those cards, it's more than just a skewed fight. It's basically impossible for you to win unless they make a huge mistake. I think more times than any other single card, an enemy using Titan has caused me to look at my hand, see I don't have anything to deal with it, and just accept that I shouldn't bother wasting any more cards this round. But hey, I guess it's not as good now when you're playing a tournament and everyone's already bringing the best possible cards to beat it. So, yeah, I guess there's nothing wrong with it anymore. Hot Potato. I won't waste time explaining myself on this. I just really don't like Hot Potato. Warp Room. C for... I'd like to see you get a rework and be a little better. I really want to like Warp Room. I love what Warp Room was presumably intended to be, but how it actually gets used can be very different. On paper, Warp Room is a mobility tool that's great for crossing otherwise oppressive sightlines and generally making it harder for the enemy to predict your approach. Sounds ideal for characters favoring short-range engagements like Mick and Sabla, right? Well, there's complications. In practice, this card can get exploited as a sort of awkward camping tool. The Warp Room itself is just so massive that you can easily set up by the edges and just wait there with a longer range weapon and or some turrets. Also, fights happening around the TVs sometimes devolve into this tedious peekaboo dance where one or both players are just constantly stepping in and out of the same TV, trying to shoot and follow each other. To the developer's credit, improving this card's design seems like a real challenge. I don't think there's an obvious solution, but I would probably start by making the Warp Room itself smaller and more undesirable as a place to camp. Maybe give the card a limited duration of like a minute or so, long enough that regular usage would be unaffected, but still preventing indefinite stalls. I also think there should be a short cooldown for each individual player for stepping through the same TV over and over, so one player can't just step in and out constantly. You know, little changes like that. I'm not confident that they would fix the card necessarily, but I do think they would be a welcome improvement and maybe could pave the way for future, more refined changes. Oh, Present, you are a gift I didn't ask for. I like the idea of Present as a sort of mix-up or equalizer, a sudden and radical change in dynamic that forces both sides to improvise a new approach to the round, something you would ideally play when you're up against the ropes and need to even the odds, but you wouldn't benefit from as much if you're already the one in a favorable position or with a luckier hand. In practice, it's a lot less exciting than that. If Present gives one of the more powerful weapon combos, whichever side has Disarm probably wins. If it gives permanent Predator Vision and Phantom Bullets, whichever side has the stronger/longer ranged bullet weapon probably wins. The fact that the mutual gimmick can be so easily negated feels counter to the spirit of the card. I think it'd be more interesting if the weapons given by Present could not be disarmed or swapped by enemy cards, except maybe another Present, of course. You can still give yourself a new weapon with one of your own cards, but you don't get to deny the enemy their gift. If you want another card that gives you a blatant one-sided advantage, you already have plenty of options. You don't need to use Present. Besides that, I think some of the Present pairings themselves just aren't that interesting. Again, permanent Predator Vision and Phantom Bullets, but that's its own can of worms, and it might be even more dependent on personal taste, so I'll just move on. Shrink Spell. I'll give you an F, but you know what? It's an F+, I guess. Shrink Spell is still ridiculously overtuned, but to give credit where it's due, it's been in a much better place ever since the damage vulnerability was increased. Despite arguably being stronger than Titan, I think Shrink is the more balanced and fair feeling of the two because of its more flexible counterplay options. You can use explosives. You can use the Leica or even the Albatross if you scope for accuracy or do what you usually do and hope for a lucky hip shot. You can use bullet time. You can use stalling cards like Ice Block or Parley. Invisible can actually buy you some valuable time, especially with silent steps. Katana is a decent fly swatter against shrunken players. I never see anyone else mention that. You should try it yourself if you haven't yet. Even some really weird underdog cards like Bear Trap can shine against Shrink Spell. Of course, not all these counters are equally effective or reliable, but there's so much more variety and room for improvisation against Shrink Spell that is absent from Titan. With some modest balance adjustments, possibly even just a numbers tweak, I could see moving Shrink Spell up to a B, honestly. It's a cute concept, and even right now it has some fun counterplay. My personal hunch would be making the user a bit larger than the current 40% scale, maybe up to 50, 60%, because right now my main frustration is still how most bullet weapons can barely even touch a shrunken player. It's not that it's very difficult to whittle down a shrunken player from full health with a Boira, Brasshopper, or FK. It's that it's nearly impossible. Oh, and God forbid the enemy plays less accuracy too. I can't say I'm happy about Shrink Spell's current position, but I'm hopeful for a better future where I can enjoy using it and playing against it a bit more. Floor is Lava. It's a card that I initially didn't really have much of an opinion on. I didn't use it that much. I barely saw anyone else use it, but I started giving it a serious shot recently. I just put it in more of my decks and forced myself to work with it, and you know what? I really like it. It has its weird little uses where it shines. Maybe my current favorite synergy is with Laser Fence. You can play Floor is Lava when the enemy has a very obvious path they will want to take then to get to high ground and approach you. You play dumb for a little bit, and then as they start to get closer, you put down a Laser Fence in their way. I think I mentioned earlier on Parley, it has an interesting synergy with Parley because Parley negates the damage from Floor is Lava, so whether you or the enemy is the one playing it, if your enemy's on a distant island, you can use Parley to then get to them without hurting yourself. It is also, turns out, quite good against Heartless on most maps. It's not the most interesting Heartless counter. It just the lava comes up and it touches the heart and the enemy dies. I can't say if I were doing some ambitious Heartless play I would be terribly happy to see the enemy play Floor is Lava, but I don't know. It's there. You can use it for that. But yeah, overall I feel like Floor is Lava has some unexplored potential that I'm looking forward to finding, and I'm looking forward to seeing other people do their own thing with. Countercard. I like Countercard. It's not a guaranteed you're going to get huge use out of it. It's sort of reliant on you having good timing, good intuition, and sort of getting in your enemy's head. But it can be quite impactful. I see some people saying it should maybe be reduced to cost 2, and I'm inclined to disagree. 3 is kind of expensive for what Countercard does, but I feel like it's for the best that something as simple and just kind of dumb as a card that deletes another card, that should come at a significant opportunity cost, I think. So long as Countercard is not commonplace in every single game, it's kind of an interesting surprise. It's an interesting mix-up. If Countercard got made cheaper and then suddenly everyone started using it all the time, then I think it would get annoying. Mirror card, though. Oh, man. This is another contender for favorite card in the game. God, I love Mirror Card. Mirror Card can be very clutch, but it usually requires you to do some sort of read or mind game to fully benefit from, like Counter Card. You would be surprised how often a conspicuous Ninja Smoke Rush followed by a tightly timed Mirror Card can let you share the enemy's Boomstick. It's a powerful asset that demands mindful risk evaluation on behalf of both the user and the target, and those are, I think, hallmarks of a solid, interactive, fun card. Ninja Log. Another A right next to Ninja Smoke. It's got all the things that you like about Ninja Smoke. It makes you fast, it makes you invisible. In fact, I think it makes you faster than Ninja Smoke. Isn't Ninja Log plus 60% speed and Ninja Smoke is just plus 40%? Self-Destruct Device. This is the one trap card with the unique honor of not being in my top 3 trap cards, and for that it earns the friend tier. I could easily spend multiple minutes talking about why I think Self-Destruct Device is unfun and unhealthy, even after its nerf that thankfully made it a bit less mindless. But this is probably one of the least controversial cards in the game to dislike. Maybe, I don't know, maybe some folks have convinced themselves it's in a good spot since the nerf. At least it got nerfed. Now I'm here to talk about the weapons. I'm just going to cover the Albatross, Boomstick, and FK simultaneously because I have similar criticisms for all of them. I'm going to put them in D tier, reluctantly. but I do think they're in a troublesome spot right now. My general opinion on weapon cards in this game is, on the whole, I think weapons are overtuned, and the power gap between the quote-unquote weak weapons and the quote-unquote strong weapons is way too wide. If you're stuck with a Boira or a Brasshopper against an enemy that has a Boomstick, FK, or Albatross, there's often no feasible chance for you to outplay them unless they miss most of their shots or they otherwise fumble badly. Or you pull some card that can deal big burst damage with any weapon like Sticky Bomb or Landmine or Mind Blowing. Intriguing to see how the meta reinforces itself. And then of course there's the akimbo versions of these guns, which they'll get their reckoning when I actually get to talking about akimbo itself. You know, these guns are fun to shoot. I like shooting them. I use all of them, but they do seem a bit much for the good of the broader game. It might be as simple as just some numbers tweaks to put these guns in a very balanced, very reasonable state. The FK, I think, is mostly fine, but I want to say the magazine is too big for how much damage it spits out. I'd maybe take it down to something like 24 instead of 31. The Boomstick, I think, should just deal a little less damage, and I kind of wish it had more pellets that were more evenly distributed, because the fact that there's only, 6 pellets per shot, and the random spread is, as significant as it is, it can feel pretty inconsistent whether you aim at someone's head and not much happens, or you aim at someone's head and they all hit. That's arguably more of a quality of life thing than a balance thing. The Albatross, it's definitely in a better spot since they nerfed the magazine size, but it still seems quite strong, and it feels kind of sad and sort of against the spirit of the weapon that the way it seems most players use the Albatross is they don't really use the scope ever, and they pretty much just always go for hip shots for anything close or medium range. In that sense, the Albatross doesn't really feel like a sniper rifle. It plays more like another shotgun, but with much better range. I don't think it needs to be any less accurate when hip-fired, because however inaccurate you make it, people are still going to gamble on that chance, because if they hit, it will still hit hard. This might be kind of an outlandish idea, but I kind of wish the Albatross had a damage penalty for shooting it unzoomed. Like, if you shoot it without being fully zoomed in, it would deal, 50 damage, but if you shoot it while it's fully zoomed in, it would deal the full 70 damage that it does right now. So there would still be a reason to hip fire. There still might be times where that's preferable, but it comes at a more meaningful trade-off. You're incentivized to use this thing, again, more like a sniper rifle, less like a shotgun. Not to mention that would better incentivize like fancy little quick scopes. I think that would be neat. That'd spice it up a little bit. Brasshopper. Going in the A tier. The Brasshopper, I think, is kind of an acquired taste, but if you give it a fair shake, it's a lot of fun. I don't really have a lot of complaints about Brasshopper. The most annoying thing about the Brasshopper is I don't like how it combines with poison bullets, but that's poison bullets. That's not the Brasshopper. Golden Boira. I'm gonna put Golden Boira in B. Back when the Golden Boira had 16 bullets in it, it definitely seemed the lesser of the two between the Leica and the Golden Boira, the only two cost 2 weapons at the time, but it still felt decent for a cost 2. And then they nerfed the Golden Boira, which was first and foremost intended as a Stevie nerf. That made Stevie considerably more balanced, but then the Golden Boira card was left with the nerfed magazine and still at cost 2. At this point, it's not that much better than the standard Boira. It is better. There's a reason people still play Stevie. But I think it's a little harder to justify spending budget on it when you're building your deck. And even if you are willing to spend 2 points on it, the Leica is right there and I would say is better in most situations. But yeah, all things considered, Golden Boira, it's in a fine place. Maybe someday I'd like to see it revisited. But for now, it's fine. All right, Katana. A tear in my eye, I'm going to put it in C tier. A couple of months ago, I probably would have comfortably put Katana in B. It had reached a pretty decent spot in terms of fun and balance, I think. But more recently, like within the last few months, I can't remember exactly, might have been around Nirvana, the damage reduction for blocking got buffed a lot. At the time, it was 60% damage blocking to now 85%. Let me clarify, I don't think it's overpowered now, but it feels like a misguided buff to me. All the improved blocking really does is help the katana in situations it was already capable of dealing with. It does nothing to mitigate the weapon's worst weaknesses. Before, if an enemy got a bit lucky with their hand, they could combine the likes of move slower, and move faster, and ninja log, and ninja smoke, and energy drink, and teleport bomb. And if you didn't have enough mobility cards of your own to keep up, they would maintain a 3-mile lead on you right up until you die. They could just kite you forever. Now that exact same thing still happens, but the dying part drags on a lot longer. It's become more tedious for both sides, despite the dynamic itself not meaningfully changing. Meanwhile, the newer players who already struggled against Sabla are having an even harder and more frustrating time than before. Again, I don't think the current katana is overpowered, but it's stronger in ways it didn't need to be stronger, and its biggest sore points remained basically untouched. To speak purely for myself, which has been the mission statement of this entire video, I'd like to rewind back to the 60% damage resistance, and, you know, they can keep it cost 2. I actually wanted the katana to be reduced to cost 2, because, you know, it was certainly not on the same level as most of the other cost 3 weapons, and it still isn't really. And then I'd just like to see the more meta-dominating weapons get their long-deserved reckoning before we ask whether the katana still needs another buff or whatever. The Leica, I'm going to put the Leica in a solid B. In the grand scheme of things, I definitely think the Leica is one of the more balanced weapons in this game, but it does strike me as a little overtuned. I feel like the fire rate is maybe a little too fast for just how much damage it pumps out. But I have to emphasize, right now in the current state of the game, I would prefer the Leica not be touched. You know, I've already talked about some of the other weapons that have much more pressing balance concerns. And, you know, if we slightly nerf the Leica before those weapons are addressed, then that would just further reinforce those weapons' dominance right now. Maybe eventually, if weapon balance in general gets a bit smoother, then we could see about tuning down the Leica just a little bit. Just a little bit. Puncher. I'm going to give this one a D also, but not really for the same reason as the other ones I've put in this category. I really want to like the Puncher more because I always like grenade launchers. I'm a big Demo Knight, Hybrid Knight guy in TF2. It doesn't have a balance problem so much as a depth and skill ceiling problem. There's just not much interesting to using the Puncher quote-unquote well or playing against it quote-unquote well. The grenades always explode on contact, and direct hits aren't any better than the maximum splash damage, so the most effective way to use this weapon is to just aim at the enemy's feet so they can't feasibly dodge the blast. Yes, the Puncher can't kill as fast as a well-aimed Boomstick, Albatross, or even Leica, but its damage is so consistent and so hard to avoid in most situations that you'll often win anyway and without needing to try nearly as hard as your enemy. With that problem stated, how could the Puncher be made a bit more nuanced? The most obvious route might be to slightly increase the damage of direct hits, but then reduce the splash damage, so hitting difficult shots is actually rewarded. Another option could be changing it to be kind of like the TF2 grenade launcher, so the grenades explode on a delay if they touch the ground before hitting a player. That would give players more agency in avoiding splash damage. And, you know, you could probably come up with some more ambitious, more experimental redesign concepts, but those two, I think, are the more grounded ones I've considered. Second to last, and it's Akimbo. Before I place this one, before you see where I put it, I need to preface, I really like Akimbo. I really like Akimbo with the Boiras, Brasshopper, Leica, even the Katana. I still don't really get why some of them deal extra damage per shot in addition to the faster fire rate. It seems kind of superfluous, but regardless, they're mostly reasonably strong. And shooting 2 guns at once is always a blast. So I was originally leaning toward giving Akimbo a B, maybe a C, but of course, that's the tamer side of this card, which also has some of the most unforgivably busted, low effort for massive reward combos in the game. Obviously, I mean Akimbo Albatross, Akimbo Boomstick, and maybe Akimbo FK, to a somewhat lesser extent. That one at least is a bit more unwieldy. So the more I thought about it and about the standards I'm holding other cards to for this tier list, I felt I need to give Akimbo an F just out of principle. I think the simplest way I can articulate it is if they removed Akimbo tomorrow, entirely, forever.
Go pop und departicleize and go zing into interdimensional space, you know? Gone forever. Boom.
Hold your tongue!
I'd miss it. I'd be really sad. But at the same time, I know the quality of my average game would improve significantly, because there would be a couple less combos to bypass all the complex player interactions that make friends versus friends fun and special to me. Hold on here, just got some interesting info from our reporters in the field. Ah, I see. 'Twas never meant to be. Fernando tried to warn them, but they did not heed. And alright, the last weapon card and just the last card we'll be covering, Deep Fryer. First off, just gonna put it here. Just gonna put it right there in D. And let me quickly cover the things I really like about Deep Fryer. It counters some very strong cards like Titan, Shrink Spell, and Tin Man very effectively. And it is one of the game's more imaginative and unique weapon concepts. Most of the guns in this game are they're things that shoot bullets, and there's not a whole lot else to them but that, which is fine. But for a game that feels as unique and unconventional as it is, it seems kind of strange how almost every weapon design is very conventional. Anyway, it's another matter how well executed the Deep Fryer's concept is. So for the cons, its worst aspect might be the abysmal player feedback. Its sounds are wimpy and barely audible. Visually, it shoots a big hose of fire that looks like it should deal damage directly, but it doesn't seem to. Only the flames that appear on or near surfaces deal damage. So, about that. After I recorded this, I wanted to do a double check to make sure I was correct. The answer ended up being more complicated than a simple yes or no, so now I gotta do an impromptu deep fry into the deep diver. Technically, yes, the hose of fire itself seems purely visual. It doesn't accurately represent what or how the deep fryer is shooting. My best evidence for this is this clip where I shoot at a bouncy wall. The hose itself remains perfectly straight and is always oriented in the direction I'm currently looking. However, the bouncy wall is visibly wobbling like when something hits it, and we can see a few flames appear off to the side on the DM screen, suggesting that whatever is actually creating the flames is being reflected off the wall. So, what is actually creating the flames? As far as I can tell from my admittedly limited testing, the Deep Fryer shoots a constant barrage of invisible projectiles. When one of these invisible projectiles hits a valid surface, which includes players, it spawns a real, damaging flame entity at the point of impact. However, if an invisible projectile flies for too long without touching something valid, it simply disappears without spawning a flame. Here's where it gets really, really strange though. The Deep Fryer's invisible projectiles can affect the physics of certain other projectiles. This includes at least some types of bombs. As well as those weird card-like projectiles you plop on the ground for things like turrets, balls, and Heartless hearts. Plop cards? Here's the new turret tech.
No, my healing!
One, go. Oh, it went through the tree. Oh, your heart is here. I can hear it.
Oh.
They can also make puncher grenades explode midair, but it's really unreliable to pull off. Okay, I can't spend any longer on this. We gotta get back to the tier list.
We've made a terrible discovery. That cannot be shared.
Like Karrotov, you can't really tell apart one flame versus 5 flames stacked on top of each other, so the damage feels arbitrary. The fire sprites themselves, I didn't mention this for Karrotov, the fire sprites themselves seem to be additive, so they're really hard to see on bright surfaces like island sand. It all goes beyond unintuitive and actively sabotages new players' attempts to understand what the weapon does or how it works. As far as gameplay goes, it functions a bit like a longer range, mostly easier to use katana that is also somehow more frustrating for both the wielder and the target. If you could hurt yourself with your own flames, maybe there'd be more depth to using it and playing against it, but as is, it just comes down to running at the enemy while looking at their legs. So, yeah, I think the Deep Fryer as a concept has a lot of interesting potential, but the current execution is very mediocre to me. Alright, that's the tier list. Don't put too much weight on the relative placings within each tier, like how far up or down a card is within its tier, because I was being mostly arbitrary about that. Now that it's done, though, I feel I ought to present some sort of takeaway or final thoughts to give this thing a greater purpose. You know, if you've been paying attention, maybe you've noticed a theme of there being a lot of cards that I think are quite fun, but because they just don't really keep up with the competition, they don't see much use, and you don't really see people pushing them to their limits, trying to do really interesting things with them. And on the flip side, a lot of the cards that are the strongest in the game, or are perceived to be the strongest, a lot of those cards I frankly don't think are very fun. I think they are very static. They give a very, very reliable, easy benefit that doesn't have a lot of interaction or depth to it, really. It just, you play it and it works for the most part. Or if there is counterplay, it's mostly dependent on having very specific other cards to deal with it. And if you don't have those cards, there's just not a lot you can realistically do. So I want to segue from that into a broader conclusion I've come to about not just the meta itself, but the state of community discussion and opinion around the meta. I think many players, especially more experienced / quote-unquote competitive ones, could stand to be more critical of the strongest cards in the game and to not hold weaker cards solely or even mostly responsible for imbalance. I have nothing empirical to prove this, just my subjective experience in the Brainwash Gang Discord, but there's a certain tone I often feel amongst quote-unquote higher-level players, a kind of smugness or scorn for some of the weaker and more niche cards. These cards are quote-unquote bad or quote-unquote useless simply because they don't have anything of value to offer, and no reasonable change you could make to other parts of the game could ever redeem them. Their tragic fate is an inevitability, and rightfully deserved, in at least some sense. Even if there is some merit to this line of thought, is this a healthy principle to lead with for game design goals and decisions? Let me speculate a few steps ahead. If, hypothetically, most or all of the strongest cards stay basically as they are right now, forever, future efforts to balance everything else around the tippy top will inevitably result in power creep. That could still technically improve variety in the meta in the long term, but it does nothing to address the reasons why many meta cards sour players' experiences in the first place. It also risks overcorrecting previously benign cards into yet more cards that players come to disdain once the novelty wears off. On a related note, I think if you've played a game a lot, and you pride yourself on the skill you've honed over time, it can be kind of a hit to your ego to concede that maybe some of the tools that most consistently help you aren't entirely fair. Or at least that some of the people claiming that might have a solid point. There's much less dissonance in concluding that there's nothing particularly wrong with the good stuff you happen to like and use a lot, that it's the fault of the bad stuff you don't care about for being bad, and that it's the fault of anyone who whines about it for expecting anything else. My point here isn't that top players are egomaniacs in denial, but that there is a conflict of interest to look critically at a status quo that you personally enjoy or thrive in. And if the developers were to take that contented feedback at face value and decide that's what they should act on, well, there's not much acting for them to do. They'll still add new cards, but a lot of the ones with deeper, more subtle interactions will be quickly abandoned by players. They just lack the dead simple, brute force strength that most current meta cards do have. Why would you workshop creative plays with Laser Fence to maybe, sometimes deal a decent chunk of damage when you already have these, which will work in almost any situation? Or even these, which do have a meaningful chance to fail, but are still undeniably easier to use for an equal or superior reward. You see what I'm getting at? In a meta where most of the best stuff is highly consistent and or has minimal counterplay, it's hard for anything more nuanced to find a niche. And because of that, I think the game has limited room to grow until some very ambitious, willfully disruptive changes are at least tried. Of course, I don't have a say in that decision, however much I wish otherwise. No one should have a say in that decision, but Brainwash Gang. The most I can reasonably hope for, and even this is very wishful thinking, is that someone at Brainwash Gang watches this video and they walk away with some novel insight that's useful to them, regardless of whatever they decide to do with it or whether I would even approve of their takeaway. I'm certain the folks at Brainwash Gang sincerely, deeply value player and community feedback, because when you're making something or contributing to something as an artist, it's hard to not care, at least a little, about how other people are reacting to that thing. But at the end of the day, no one can tell them what they want out of their work, but themselves. And to suggest that any of us could do that for them, or should do that for them, is, I think, pretty presumptuous and entitled. So, yeah, selfishly, I hope they love everything I've said here, and they act upon every recommendation I've made, and they put a statue of me in the lobby to reaffirm how important I've been, and Bakeley composes a 7-second loop inspired by the events of this video. But really, wherever Brainwash Gang wants to take Friends vs. Friends, whatever they're doing for it at this moment, I hope it's gratifying for them, and I hope they're having a good time with it. Now, I don't have an elegant send-off for this video beyond that, and this project's been in the making for literal months, and I really want to see it through before I delay it anymore. So, let's call it here. Bye-bye.